Chapter 40, Chapter 37, The Return to Gate. Chapter 37, The Return to Gate. Ryu Batison, son of Gainer and Valerie and brother of Yua, stood on the edge of the coastline south of his home and stared at his own reflection in the sword he held before him, under the sun. Ryu Batison, leader and founder of the mercenary group Dragon Kin, owner of his own town in southern Oria, vagabond and professional killer, stared back. The sun was bright, the sky was blue, and so was the sea, but he was lost in a fog.
I thought it was a day like any other. Yua hated taking naps, so she ran out to play by the dragon, just like she usually did. She always liked that. Somehow, though I had resolved never to tell either of you until you were older, she knew. I wonder if Valerie is still there, still sleeping, still watching over the home she found when she emerged from that other world. Your mother. She never told me her clan, never explained her wings to me, but I knew as well, just as Yua did. She never would worship Saint Eva with me, and the rest of the townspeople. I'm sure our neighbors found it strange, that the priest of Saint Eva would marry an unrepentant heretic, but none of them ever said anything about it to us. I never saw myself marrying one who was not of the faith, but on that day years before you were born, when I met that wild maiden walking down from the mountain, with no knowledge of the world whatsoever, I lost my heart to her, and I think she did to me, despite how much older I was.
The snow had stopped falling already, and in fact had melted away, but nobody was reassured. Winter was still far from over, and a miracle that had happened once before could come again at any time. Ryu's thoughts were not on the weather, however. The crashing of the waves and the cries of the seabirds were silent to him. He simply stood there, staring at his own reflection in the Empire, the blade of the Gold Lord, as his father's voice echoed in his head over and over.
We were married in less than a year, and we spent more years together, happier than I ever thought possible. More than anything, it was the memory of those years that kept me sane inside that dreadful machine. Those, and the years after, raising you and your sister. After the doors of the gate opened a second time, at the command of a madman, and released the legions of infinity into this world. We did not know of it until it was too late, and even then, I never suspected that the perpetrator was the archpriest of my own faith. They were all there, all of my tormentors. Those brutes Kawadara and Shapukai, the lunatics Aruhameral and Necromanson. And of course, Habaruko. I dueled him there to protect our home and children, as Valerie revealed her heritage at last, in order to do the same with their leader, a monstrosity named Baruberi. Their strength was unimaginable, but somehow we triumphed, and in doing so sent all the demons running with their tails between their legs. But though we won the day, I lost my wife, all the same. Only days after the birth of our second child, I was widowed.
Eventually, after how long he didn't know, Ryu sheathed his sword again. That was the only movement he made, though. Aside from that, he remained where he was standing, as the day crept by and the tide slowly retreated. He was standing out of distance of the waves, sand dry underfoot, but he still idly noticed as the ocean crept further and further away.
She explained it to me before she left me, on that night when my world was destroyed. Her people had sent her from their world to ours, for two purposes. To bear a child who would one day be their only hope against the demons, as well as ours, and then to become part of the enchantment sealing the gate, its sleeping guardian who would strengthen the door to infinity beyond even Habaruko's power to break. But she dallied in that task, unable to set aside her love for me and you, until the demons forced her hand, and reminded her of just how much depended on her. I brought the two of you up, keeping the secret of your destiny and your heritage from you, intending to tell you when you were grown. But that chance was denied to me. After Yua and I left you in the meadow that day, with your mother, we returned to our home, only to find everybody in town under magic of the mind.
Closing his eyes, gritting his teeth and clenching his fist, Ryu transformed again. Once more, as he had in the church of Saint Eva, his human shape and form gave way to that of the dragon, the final form that was unique to him. Vast wings beating, purple plates heavy and bulky, his tail thrashing behind him as his head stretched out on a serpentine neck, the dragon of Gate loomed above the coastline 20 feet tall.
Habaruko had returned for his vengeance upon me, for crippling him on that night years ago, and he had not come alone. Aruhameral, their mentat, practitioner of an art I had thought to be forgotten, was already fogging the minds of my neighbors. He stole their memories away, and replaced them with lies and illusions. Against him, even I was helpless. He clouded my mind and my ability to cast magic before I could get a single spell off, and from there I was lost. All I was able to do was hold him off long enough for Yua to escape. I know not where she is now, or even if she still lives. Later, Habaruka told me of what they had done after I fell. While connecting me to that machine, he gloated about many things. His identity, his purpose, the truth of the faith I had devoted my life to. And you, Ryu. He told me of how an innocent clergyman with nothing but peace in his heart had been left to replace me in the town. Of how you ran, as you did, with a new friend who destiny brought to your door when you needed one the most. Of the life you led from that day onward, alone on the road, a child without a home.
Rearing back, the Gate Dragon roared, and his fury brought with it the same storm of blistering energy that it had before, in the Grand Cathedral of Evray. The blazing rain of energy burned a path through sand and sea alike, carving through the ocean like a knife through butter as far as the eye could see ahead of him. His scream, the scream of a life lost, echoed over the coastline, and even the clouds above blew away from him.
I remained there beneath that accursed city, that foul mockery of everything I had believed in, for more than a decade. Habaruko and his cohorts were the only ones who ever visited me, and their only purpose in doing so was to increase my torment. At first, they told me of you, of all the rigors you endured, but in time even the knowledge that you still lived was taken from me. I prayed for death 1,000 times over, but I had no God left to pray to. Bad enough that the machine took everything from me, and turned it into Evan's power. I would not add to it with my worship as I had before. That is the most diabolical secret of Habaruka's work, of the church he founded. All prayer that is devoted to Saint Eva, whether for good or for ill, becomes his power. Evans cares nothing for intent, all that he seeks is devotion, and he is infinitely greedy. Prayer, emotion, magic. And worst of all, the very souls of the believers themselves. All of these things have been increasing his power for centuries already. The gate which Valerie guards is all that stands between him and our world, and one day, he will be strong enough to break through it.
His energy spent, the Gate Dragon shrank, turning in on itself to revert to Ryu Batison, young and strong and human in appearance save for the blue in his hair. Exhausted, he crouched on the sand, breathing heavily, and stared at the path of absolute destruction he had carved out of the beach before him.
Evans is the son of Myria, goddess of lies, the seed of evil she left to her servants when she went to face those destined to slay her. Though he is young by the standards of deities, only a single millennium in age, he is already a greater threat than even she ever was. Myria sought to play with the lives of mortals, to bend them to her will for her own sick amusement, but Evans has no interest in such things. All that lives upon this world is only more power that is not yet his, to his eyes, and he will never stop until nothing remains for him to consume. Already, his servants have begun, even before he emerges. Barberries will drain the life from the trees, converting them into Evan's power. He is the only demon who I truly fear. Even Habaruko, ancient and vile as he is still mortal. But Baruberi, even I do not know his true nature, or how he came to serve Myria first, and then Evans after her. Now that Evray is destroyed, such efforts will likely be the chief source of Evans' intake.
Ryu. A voice called softly, and he hauled himself back to his feet. Turning around, he saw Kat and Nina approaching together, both their eyes wide and hesitant. It was the Warren girl who had hailed him, and as she met his eyes, she spoke again.
What are you doing? Oh, my son. I would endure 10 more years of that torture, if I could, if it would return my vision to me so that I could look upon your face. Come, let me hold you, so that I may try. Yes, I think I can visualize it. Ryu. You've grown up into such a fine, strong young man. Please, tell me about what has happened to you, in the years since we last parted. Tell me of this town Miss K says you have founded, and of these people who live with you here, who helped you save me from Evray. Tell me everything I missed, Ryu, please. I want to know about my son. The more I use the breath of fire, the less it wears me out,
Ryu explained, still breathing heavily.
It's a slow process, and it sucks to go through, but by the time I was ready for the next stage, both times, it was bearable. Still exhausted me, but not to the point where I couldn't fight. I'm hoping it works the same way for the third stage. Repetitive training, in order to increase your stamina.
Nina slowly nodded.
I see. It's a viable theory, but it could be very dangerous, you realize. That's why I'm doing it way out here.
Ryu jerked his head back towards the waves, as they poured in over the path of destruction, filling the trench as if it had never been.
So nobody'll get hurt. I think she meant for you, Ryu,
Kat said, wincing.
What happens if you overdo it? Do it too many times, too quickly, and burn yourself out so badly it does permanent damage,
Nina murmured.
Thanks.
She nodded.
Yeah, that. I'll just have to pace myself so that it doesn't come to that, I guess.
He shrugged, trying to look less exhausted than he felt.
What happened last time is unacceptable. I have no idea where we go from here, or what we're going to do, but whatever it is, I'm going to have to be able to use this form without being completely useless afterward. I think we're going to need it. I wish I could disagree with that,
Nina said, shaking her head. She paused then, opened her mouth, closed it again, and then glanced at Kat, who met her eyes before they both looked back at him.
So,
Kat said, sounding awkward, scratching the back of her head.
Your dad, hey.
More. We need more power. God needs more power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your body and soul to God. You are destined to become God's power.
Yeah.
Ryu tilted his head back, staring up at the sky.
Habaruko had him stashed in that basement ever since they pulled that shit in Gate 10 years ago. He's been waiting for me down there ever since. As if we needed another reason to hunt the bastard down and grate his face off. We're taking shifts,
Nina told him.
Me, and Deez, and Spar. One of us is near him at all times to keep drain spells going every hour, so that he won't suffer another overload. Nero knows the spell, as well. Before we leave again, we'll move your father into our building so he can keep that up. You're okay, though, right?
Kat asked quietly.
I mean... I don't. What's it like? I never really believed you weren't real. I wish I could tell you.
Ryu closed his eyes.
But words. There just aren't any. You know. Yeah,
she said after a moment.
I think I do. If there's anything we can do.
Nina started to say, then trailed off.
You can.
Opening his eyes again, Ryu gave them both a tired, weary smile.
Just keep on being you. Both of you. Stay with me, please. We've lost so many other people, but... as long as you're here, you and all the others.
He let it hang.
You don't even have to ask,
Kat promised.
Always,
Nina agreed.
Thanks.
Ryu walked towards them.
Let's head back, then. Is everybody else in town too? Yeah, Sten just got back.
Kat nodded.
Kind of why we came looking for you now. Figured you would like to know. You thought right,
he said, trying to smile, though he doubted that it looked convincing.
Thanks. We should have another meeting. Has everybody had Kay take a look at them? I think so,
Nina told him.
From what I've heard, it's the usual all around. A few more aches we'll be feeling every now and then, but nothing actually debilitating, and that's what's important. Did you want to stop by and get your dad?
Kat asked, then quickly kept talking.
I mean, in case he has another freakout while we're in the meeting. We'll have everybody who can use that spell there, so none of them will be watching him, you know. Yeah, I guess.
Ryu slowly nodded, and they turned as they reached K's street. Before they could knock on her door, though, she opened it, apparently anticipating them.
Hello again,
she said, smiling slightly.
If you're looking for your father, Ryu, Sten, and Rand already came by to bring him over to your building for the meeting. Should have known they'd have figured it out before even I did,
Ryu muttered wryly.
Thanks, K.
He started to turn away, then paused, remembering something he had been trying not to. Taking a deep breath, he met her eyes.
There's something else, actually. Something I'm afraid is going to be hard on you. Is it about Ray?
She asked quietly, and continued when they all blinked in surprise.
I already know. He sent me a letter, by magic, yesterday morning. He told me about who he really was, and what he was going to do. And what would happen?
She closed her eyes.
He's dead, isn't he? I'm afraid so,
Ryu admitted, just as quiet.
He gave his life for us, fighting by our side. For us, and for the true believers in Saint Eva who were being sacrificed by the demons. He died bravely. I never really believed in heroes before. Seen too much of the world to actually buy that, you know? But Ray. He was one. A hero. He was,
Kay agreed, eyes still closed.
For all of his life. Thank you, Ryu, Kat, Nina. For telling me. If you'll excuse me.
Turning away, she closed the door behind her.
Shit,
Kat muttered under her breath.
Indeed,
Nina agreed. Ryu didn't say another word. He simply led the way back to their own home, where they found the rest of the team in the meeting room, waiting for them, with Gainer on a couch Nero had dragged in from somewhere. Walking over, he took the old man's hand in his.
Hey, Dad. How are you feeling? The same as before, I suppose,
Gainer replied, smiling slightly.
Don't worry about me, son. Even wrung out like this, I'm not going to go dying on you this easily. Go on, talk with your team. I'll stay quiet and listen. Alright, but let us know if you need anything,
Ryu told him. Sitting down at the table, he looked around at everybody, taking in their faces. Bao looked pensive, while Sten seemed edgy. Rand was bleak, and Jean subdued. Nero appeared to be more thoughtful than anything else, and Spar was as placid as ever. Dees looked angry, Nina depressed, and Kat caught between both. Taking a deep breath, he steepled his hands.
Alright, people. Before we talk about where we go from here, does anybody have any reports to give? Smith was gone when we went back to Scotland,
Kat said immediately.
We searched the place, and found a note from her eventually. Said that some paladins came in around noon to storm the place. She managed to lure them into traps, so she's okay, but it was obvious that they knew what they were looking for, so she took off out of there. I think she figured we were all dead meat, but just in case, she said that if anybody was still alive to find her note, that she'd be heading back over to the thieves' tomb. Again.
Dees growled, rolling her eyes.
Why? Don't ask me.
Kat shrugged.
Like any of us know how her head works? Anyways, after we found that, we cleaned out all their books and records and shit, then. Well, we torched the place.
She sighed.
Wasn't sure if it was right, but it seemed like what they would have wanted. Didn't want monsters infesting the place or bandits moving in or anything like that, you know. I'd have done the same,
Ryu assured her.
I think you're right. Speaking of such things, we took a trip back to the island of Evray this morning,
Sten continued.
And the island's all that's left with that name now, because the city is way gone. There's a smoking crater about 10 miles wide where it used to be. Complete obliteration. Shame it's probably too much to hope for that bastard Habaruko went down with the ship. Not a chance.
Dees shook her head.
The only good news, if you can call it that, is that he won't be hiding in a rat hole for long, either. This won't be the last we see of him. He'll be back, he won't be able to help himself. And when he does rear his ugly head again, next time, he won't get away.
Bao smiled without a trace of humor.
No matter what. I was worried about Mina, but before we even went back to Evray, I found out that she managed to follow us here,
Nina added.
Somehow, it seems she always knows where we are. I'm not really surprised,
Ryu admitted.
I guess the question is, what state does this leave the Church of Saint Eva in? Should we be watching our backs for reprisals? Honestly.
Sten shrugged.
There's no way to tell just yet, boss. Probably won't be for a while. We cored the faith pretty cleanly, and everything that's left over is going to be completely boggled by that. Depending on how many paladins were out of the city at the time, and how many of those are demons, it could go any number of ways. My advice would be to try and get our personal stake in this settled before they figure what they're gonna do. Probably smart.
Ryu nodded.
Alright, on to the matter at hand. Where we go from here? For a while, I wasn't too sure. We don't have anything left that's concrete for us to go on. We've run down all of our leads, one by one. Evray was the big one, or so we thought, but it's dust and here we are. So what does that leave us?
Rand grunted.
The only other place we know about with demon activity,
Ryu replied.
The one I've been unconsciously avoiding even considering, ever since we heard about that. I should have known better. Should have known that sooner or later, it would come to this.
He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again.
Gate. My hometown, and my family's. Barberry's still in the area, as far as we know. And even if he's not, the gate in the mountain that gave the town its name is connected to all of this, somehow. The one your mother's guarding,
Nina murmured.
Exactly.
Ryu inclined his head towards his father.
Dad says that on the night she transformed, Baruberi and Habaruko led a horde of demons out of there. Combine that with the fact that the big man's still watching the place, and it looks like that's where this is all going to end. I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of afraid of going back. But unless anybody else has any other ideas, it looks like that's what it's going to be, so I'll just have to deal. There is one more thing,
Dee said quietly, and everybody turned to look at her. Her face was calm, though her hands shook slightly.
It's something I've been avoiding thinking about, myself. Because I didn't want to. Didn't want to even think about the possibility of it. But everybody else has been facing down their pasts. If you're taking your turn, Ryu, I guess it's time I did the same.
She met his eyes.
Before we head to gate, we should stop by the Isle of Giants, up north of Windia. There's some people there waiting for us. Our ancestors,
Ryu said calmly.
And their friends. The ones who stayed. Karn, and Gobe, and...
He left it hanging.
And Bo.
She slowly nodded.
That was what kept me from wanting to go back there. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about seeing him again. But... hell. Can't keep avoiding it forever. I owe him more than that.
She grimaced.
I'd say I wanted to settle it, one way or another, before we finished this and I went back to sleep again, but the truth is... I'm not so sure I'm going to, this time. Go to sleep right away, I mean. After we're done. Have you ever done that before?
Rand asked, looking at her.
Stayed awake, even after the job was done. Never.
She shook her head.
Not since the first time, and that was different. But not once I started doing it this way, no. I'm not sure why I'm considering it now, either. I mean, I care about you guys, but the longer I stay up, the more it's going to hurt when I do have to eventually say goodbye. That's what always got me to take the plunge, both times before. And it's bad enough that I woke up early, and knew 3 of you for years before we even got started. But...
She closed her eyes.
There's a lot of factors. I just don't know, this time. Doubt I will, until we actually get there. But you want to see Bo again?
Bao said, then made a face.
Ugh, that's going to get confusing with me and him. Imagine how I feel about it,
Nina commented quietly.
At least Martin is going by a different name these days. Yeah.
Dees exhaled, ignoring that.
Yeah, I do. I want to see him again. Then we'll go.
Ryu nodded.
All right. Stop by the Isle of Giants first, talk with them, see if they have any advice.
He smiled grimly.
To be honest, I kind of like the sound of that anyways. I've been getting more than a little tired of all of them just showing up whenever they feel like and acting like innocent bystanders. Time we called them on that. After that. Gate. And with any luck, Habaruko and Baruberi. When are you headed out, then?
Nero asked.
Not to be throwing around orders or nothing, but just a suggestion? You all look like you could use a couple more days of rest. Especially you, Ryu. Does it show?
He asked dryly, before shaking his head.
Yeah, okay. The rest of the week's off. Maybe fly up to the Isle of Giants, since I can't see how that could possibly involve much strain if Habaruka shows up there. I'll convert back to the Church of St. Eva, but we're not heading to Gate until we're all feeling back up to full again. Just in case. Right.
The old man nodded.
That in mind, then. Bunch of the townsfolk are really getting down to work, after that last meeting we had with them. Most of it ain't done yet, so it'll keep, but that new girl from Guns, Ikachi, says she's figured out how that lost technology works. Figured if you're spending a couple days around here, you might want to talk to her about that. Lost technology?
Gainer asked, from the couch.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's all right, Dad,
Ryu told him, while mentally cursing. He had forgotten about that.
It's... Well, the thing is, this town. We've found something like what they stuck you in, underneath it. I don't think anybody's ever been in it, though. Well, not ever since it was buried, anyways. I see.
Gainer frowned, but it looked more thoughtful than angry.
Habaruko did say that there were a few such devices in other parts of the world. More primitive models, buried and forgotten. That's pretty much how it went, yeah,
Sten agreed.
When Obelisk blew up, you know about that, right? Miria's flying fortress, the pieces went just about everywhere, all over the world. We've found intact fragments in both Sima Fort and High Fort. Sima didn't have one of those things, but High Fort did. Shippuden was planning on using it, although we managed to take her out before she could. We only found out about this one recently. We should have just wrecked it offhand, I suppose,
Ryu admitted.
But... even if we're not putting anybody in there, which we're obviously not, we figured maybe an expert could learn something useful from it. So we brought one in, from Guns. Then I find myself agreeing with Mr. Mani,
Gainer said firmly.
It would be advisable to see what this young lady has learned. Use Nero'll be fine, Mr. Battison,
Nero told him, scratching his bald head.
Ain't never been one to stand on ceremony anyway, and especially not with family o' the family. Well put.
Gainer smiled.
But I'm going to have to insist that that goes both ways, then. Just Gainer, please. For all of you. All right, Mr. I mean, Gainer.
Cat said, smiling.
I think we can manage that. Can somebody go get Ikachi, then?
Ryu asked.
Assuming she's not doing anything right now, or that she doesn't need us to come down there. I'll get her,
Nero said, standing up.
Oh, you should be taking it easy, and this is coming from the old geezer with the cane. Be back in a sec. Has something occurred that I am ignorant of?
Jean asked, looking confused, once Nero was gone.
This may just be me, but I do not think that was entirely a joke. It wasn't.
Sten shook his head.
Nobody said anything to him, of course, but I think Nero's starting to feel bad about being the only guy drawing a paycheck from our activities who's not actually out there in the field with us. And the fact that that's not what his job entails doesn't help much when you see everybody else limping and looking like they just went over a waterfall in a barrel on a 10 any dare. Makes him feel like he's not really one of us. From the standpoint of the destiny bullshit.
Deez made a face.
He's actually not. That kind of confused me a little, at first. But on that score, at least, I'm right with the rest of you on telling Fate to take a hike. He's one of us, and anybody who says different doesn't count and doesn't matter. What you said?
Bao nodded, then sighed.
Of course, that won't help him much, even if we tell him. I will speak with him,
Spar said quietly.
In private, so as not to provoke a hostile reaction. There are times when I feel a similar sentiment, concerning my own role on the team, in regards to the fact that anything within my capabilities in regards to combat is exceeded by the abilities of others. I as well, Mon ami,
Jean said, smiling.
But then I remember that our very versatility is the reason for which we were accepted, and all stands explained. Surely, between us we will be able to cheer Monsieur Nero up, yes. Ah.
Spar hesitated for a moment.
Something like that, yes. Like what?
Nero opened the front door again.
All right, enough talking about me when I ain't here to hear.
He stumped his way back to his seat, Ikachi following him.
Nero tells us you've discovered some things about that lost technology beneath the town.
Ryu asked her, ignoring that.
Ah, yes.
Aikachi nodded quickly, shifting one foot and then another as she wrung her hands excitedly.
You want me to explain it, right? To tell you how it works. That's what we've called you here for, yes,
Bao said politely after a short pause.
Is that, going to be a problem? Oh, no, 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 no.
She waved her hands.
Not at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. I'm so glad I can finally tell somebody about it. I wanted to, but I thought I should probably let you know first before I told anybody else here, because it's your town, right? Even if it could affect all of them if somebody powered it up, which I'm not sure how to do yet, so at least I knew that wasn't going to happen. But still, I've been waiting to explain, and... Oh, you know what I'm talking about, right? I think we do, yes,
Nina remarked mildly.
What have you discovered, then? Well, like I said, so far I still haven't managed to figure out what the power source is,
Aikachi continued, she wasn't even short of breath.
All I know is that that's what the seat is for.
She paused.
Oh, no. You don't think that that means it's supposed to be powered by a living being, do you? A sentient one? I mean, it's been theorized before, but nobody's ever tried actually doing it, at least not legally. That would be horrible. Indeed it would,
Ryu agreed calmly, keeping a straight face with some effort, as Gainer winced but remained quiet.
Anyways, what I have managed to figure out is what it does when it's powered up.
Aikachi told them, apparently not noticing the reaction.
You see, even though that control point is the only part of it that's accessible, the machinery is actually spread underneath this entire town. Further, even, it extends for a good half a mile past the current outskirts in any direction. You could probably even expand the buildings a little further and still be within the borders of where the technology is. Not all the way down to the coast, of course, but close. Hey.
Bao raised an eyebrow.
Good to know, I guess. But what does it do? Well, as far as I can tell, it somehow manages to use Magitech, that's the combination of magic and technology, to generate a personal levitation field around the town and the earth beneath it.
Aikachi explained delightedly.
It's controllable from the chamber, of course, and while I'm not entirely sure of the limitations on height, I'm not entirely sure there are any. Of course, it won't be able to get up much airspeed, but even so, can you imagine the possibilities? Are you telling us that if we powered up that system, our town would be capable of flight?
Nina demanded after a moment, as half the room looked confused and the other half awestruck.
Thanks for the translate,
Kat muttered, prompting nods of agreement from some of the others, before they all blinked.
Wait a second here, you're saying that our town could fly? Exactly.
Aikachi beamed.
The town, and enough ground to keep it architecturally stable. Just flying through the air, a floating island. Isn't that amazing? If only we could find some way to power it. One that didn't require living people, anyways. That can't be it, why would anybody even build something like that? Why indeed?
Dees murmured, looking downward. Power. We need your power. God needs your power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your bodies and souls to God. You are destined to become God's power.
Well, thanks for telling us,
Ryu said quickly.
We appreciate it. I assume you're going to be continuing to look into it. Oh, yes.
Aikachi assured them.
In between everything else I'm doing, of course. Everybody here is so friendly, they're always coming over to ask me for help with the plumbing or with kitchen appliances or things like that. I have twice as much to do here as I did back in Ghent. It's so much fun. Thank you again for letting me live here. I just hope there's a way I can repay you for that, someday. I'm sure there will be, Missy,
Nero said with a wink.
We're big believers in karma, round these here parts. Oh, I hope so.
She agreed, turning away.
I'll let you get back to your business, then. See you around town. Well,
Ryu muttered once she had left.
Can't say I saw that one coming, though for some reason, I kind of feel like I should have.
He stood up.
Meeting adjourned, unless somebody else has something to say about that. We've all got a lot to think about. Next stop, the Isle of Giants, once we've all recovered at least a little. We had better be, from what I've heard about that place,
Sten muttered as the meeting broke up. The next several days were, as Ryu had planned, highly relaxing. He fished, he swam, he napped, and he even read a little. The only real exercise he got was limited to sparring sessions on the roof with Kat. They resumed those without a word between them about the period in which she hadn't been present, and he didn't need to ask her to know that that was something they were never going to speak of again, no matter how their relationship turned out. She hadn't been in love with Tika, but there had been some sort of connection there, and its brutal severance had changed her in a way that was none of his business, or anybody else's. The rest of the townspeople were sympathetic. They asked for no details, but made it clear all the same that they were still loyal to their town's founders. The Rivovs provided food, the Hasekos kept the ale and wine flowing, and everybody was generally cheerful and friendly. The main topics of local gossip seemed to be the lost technology, which Ikeiji had lost no time in telling the rest of the town about after the group, and Ryu's father, who was making friends quickly and easily. Most of all, though, everybody seemed to have an opinion on the snow, and what it meant, if anything. Several days later, after sleeping in late and having a hearty breakfast, they set off again, with Nero promising to watch Gainer carefully for any signs of another magical overload. There had been several more, but all of them had been caught in time to prevent any risk to his life. On Dee's advice, rather than taking the Great Bird to the Isle of Giants, they'd had her warp them there, onto a small beach on the south side.
Good thing we dressed warmly,
Ryu muttered as they looked around. The isle was near the North Pole of the world, and so they'd each added a layer of thick furs atop their armor and clothing. Looking around at the snow-covered island ahead of them and the icy ocean behind, he wondered if maybe they shouldn't have worn too. About all he could tell of the landscape was that there were trees, though those were sparse and covered with snow as well. Everything else was completely muffled by the cold white layer, several feet deep.
I must confess, a certain matter is arousing my curiosity,
Jean said as they began trudging forward.
In times long past, the name of this island was Pagoda, yes. And yet, today it is known only as the Isle of Giants. Such changes of name are commonplace, I am aware, but what was the rationale behind this particular nomenclature? What?
Kat asked after a moment.
He's asking why it's called the Isle of Giants,
Sten translated for her.
Oh, okay.
She nodded.
That's actually a damn good question. Why is it called the Isle of Giants, anyways?
On cue, a sludge hopped out from a cluster of tall trees, turning to face them. Sludges were monsters, native to Auria, scavengers who only attacked travelers by ambush in packs, mostly contenting themselves with the leavings of other predators. They were creatures made of acidic slime, an ugly green color, shaped like a tall dome topped by golden eyes, its only real organs. How they functioned without any others was a mystery Ryu had never really cared enough to look into. Chopping them in half or a bolt through them served to kill them despite that. Of course, normal sludges weren't 20 feet tall, and almost as wide.
Ah, yes,
Sten commented as everybody stared, and the sludge stared back, eyes bobbling.
Of course. Obvious in hindsight, really. Why don't we handle this one?
Nina murmured, glancing at Dees, who nodded.
I think magic will work better than physical force. By all means, ladies.
Bao inclined his head.
Hold on, I want in on this, too,
Kat interjected as the sludge started hopping their way, shaking the earth with each bound.
I'm gonna have to practice this sometime if I want to actually use it, and books aren't gonna be much help. All together, then.
Dee suggested, and Nina nodded.
That should suffice.
The three women concentrated, and a moment later, fire, ice and lightning all raged, consuming the giant sludge entirely.
You okay?
Ryu asked, stepping forward to catch Kat's arm as she stumbled once the fight was over.
Just a little woozy, is all,
she replied, shaking herself.
Kind of tired all of a sudden, too. That's because you just blew your entire magical power in one go,
Dees explained.
You don't have any training, so focusing it is completely out of the question. Shape and form, too. You just let it all go, all at once. I suppose it's to your credit that you can at least manage an element. It's powerful, but you'll only be able to do it once. Hey, as long as I can do it at all, that's more than enough for me,
Kat replied, smirking.
Me, using magic? A year ago I'd have just laughed and said to tell me another one, and to try and make it at least a little more convincing this time. I wish I could disagree,
Nina said, smiling slightly as well.
Perhaps you've been paying more attention than any of us thought, yourself included.
Everybody considered that for a moment.
Nay,
Kat drawled.
Anyways, where is this place, anyways? They've got a house or something, right? Think I see one, up ahead,
Sten told her, shading his eyes.
Off in the distance. Let's head that way and see if I'm right.
They did, and soon enough it came into view, growing larger and more distinctive as they approached. It was a simple, but sturdy, wood cabin from what they could see of it beneath the snow. Its chimney, which had been empty before, started to put out smoke as they drew near, and two old men sat on the porch in rocking chairs, smoking pipes and drinking ale. Aside from the climate, it looked just like a country lodge, save for the bright yellow banner stretched from one corner of the roof to the other, reading, "The Isle of Giants welcomes the Dragonkin in black."
Really?
Bao muttered under his breath as they approached.
Was that really necessary? With these guys?
Dees replied, deliberately avoiding looking at one of the old men.
Be glad there isn't confetti and music.
They continued forward, until they stood before the porch, and regarded the old men silently.
I was plowing the land the other day,
one of them said eventually, tapping out his pipe. He was of the Forest clan, like Bo's mother had been, though his canine features were more akin to a wolf than a dog, long and lean. His fur was a steely gray, and despite the cold, he wore only green pants and boots.
Found a strange rock. When you hold it, you can see the bones in it. Weird.
Yep, the other one agreed. He looked human, though his skin was far darker than most, almost black. His hair was as grey as his companion's fur, short and curly, and he was dressed just as strangely considering the temperature, in shorts and a vest with gloves and boots that were all banana yellow.
Weird. Maybe even strange.
Could be, the first one agreed. They continued to sit there, showing no signs of noticing their visitors.
Yeah, no,
Ryu said flatly after a few more moments.
Cute, but I don't think so. Cut the senile act, hey, guys? We're not buying it. Have we met, son?
The human-looking one said, eyes focusing on him now.
Don't think we have. You must be mistaking us for somebody else. Happens every now and then. Really?
Dees said, finally meeting the Forest clansman's eyes.
Somehow, I doubt it. Afternoon, Bo. Afternoon, Dees.
Bo, hero of the Forest clan, one-time greatest archer in the world and right-hand man to the Dragon clansman who had saved the world from the Dark Dragon Empire in the Second Dragon War, replied just as calmly, meeting her eyes as well.
Been a while. That it has.
She glanced at the other man, and smiled slightly despite herself.
Been keeping Karn out of trouble. He's been trying.
Karn, ancestor of the Fusion clan, great father to the girls next door and former prince of thieves, said with a smirk.
Every once in a while I head out with Goba just to cause some. Keep my hand in, you know? That, and keeping an eye on those ridiculous descendants of mine.
He glanced at Ryu.
Your security's pretty good, but you might want to beef it up a bit more, just to be on the safe side. Maybe we should,
Ryu agreed calmly.
Are we missing anything I should know about? No, I searched him when he got back,
Bo assured him, knuckling Karn's head.
Pretty sure he was just doing it for the hell of it. Hey, they're here.
Goba said, opening the front door.
Are you two screwing with their heads for shits and giggles? Why didn't you invite me? Is this normal?
Rand asked Dees.
Or are we just special? Hard to say, really.
She shrugged.
All right.
Bo shook his head, standing up.
It's nice to meet all of you. Now come on inside, and warm up, hey.
Turning towards the door, he raised his voice.
Hey, guys. They're here. Tell em to come in and warm up, then.
Another, more familiar, old man's voice came back.
We already did. Okay, this is just getting silly now.
Goba stepped out of the way.
Come on in. We figured this would be coming, so we're ready for you. Was the banner really necessary?
Ryu asked dryly as he walked in.
Hey, we put a lot of work into that banner.
Karn protested.
It's a work of art. You should probably just ignore them when they start doing this,
a woman in a sky blue leotard, boots and gloves advised them from near the fire pit set in the right side of the front room, under the chimney. She looked to be in her late 50s, but was still attractive despite her age, short hair mixed gold and silver. Her wings were large, their feathers snowy white, and her blue eyes were sharp and cheerful.
They'll start acting more like their normal selves if you do, instead of the grumpy old man bit. Unlike some people living here. That's because I am a grumpy old man,
the old man in unadorned red robes who went by the name of Martin instead of his own shot back, standing next to her, as he looked their way as well. Tall and strong, with long, flowing snow-white hair, his only distinctive features were the scar across his forehead and the burning anger in his fierce green eyes, though his smile was friendly enough. The two of them were supervising a spit, on which an entire ox was roasting.
Get your asses in here, all of you. The kids aren't used to this cold. You say that like we should be,
Sten commented.
As if walking around like the lot of you should be physically possible. I grew up doing overnight patrols in a desert, I have a fur coat over damn near my entire body, and I'm shivering here. You get used to it after a couple of centuries,
Bo explained with a shrug.
Or maybe it's just something about living that long at all. These two certainly didn't seem to mind, and they just showed up here about a month and a half ago. We're special,
Martin said dryly.
Come on in, warm up, pour yourself a mug.
He inclined his head towards a row of kegs set in another wall, one of which was tapped, with a 6-pack of wine bottles on a small end table nearby.
The meat will take a while longer, since we didn't know when you would be here. It's not often we get visitors, which calls for only one thing. Let me guess.
Ryu sighed, but smiled as well.
A party. How did you know?
Gobi grinned.
We can talk business later on, if you really want to. Right now, though, we've got more important things to do. Now then, are there any musicians in the audience? Ah, but of course, mon ami.
Jean replied exuberantly, stepping forward.
Allow me to ask of you, then, if you possess a lute on the premises, yes. Here we go,
Bao muttered, shaking his head.
No stopping it now. You say that like there was ever any chance of that,
Bo replied, smiling as well.
We're professionals ourselves, kid. We know what we're doing. Why am I not surprised by this?
Despite their cynical response to the inherent absurdity of the situation, none of the dragon kin actually went so far as to object to the reception they received. On the contrary, they took to it as if they direly needed a way to enjoy themselves without any sort of stress, which it could be said they did, even after several days of relaxing back home. The roast ox was good, the ale was better, and everybody got along wonderfully. Despite the generation gap, and the difference in the methods they had used, they were all the same sort of people deep down, and everybody could sense that. Eventually, after several hours, they started to scatter, breaking up into smaller groups. The two Ninas were the first to leave, along with Kat, claiming that they were going up to the roof for what they referred to as girl talk. For some reason, they also invited Spar along, even more inexplicably, it agreed, and they all departed through the front door. A little while later, most of the others left as well. Karn and Gobi invited Bao, Sten, and Jean out back to get some air, to which they agreed. Nobody mentioned their reasoning, but everybody was thinking it. After initial joviality, Dees and Bo had both grown steadily more quiet, and were now sitting several feet away in front of the fire, drinking in silence and avoiding each other's eyes. Rand, looking even more sober than usual, had asked to come as well, and they had agreed.
Come on, kid,
Martin said once he and Ryu were the only ones left in the main room aside from Bo and Dees, inclining his head towards the front door.
Let's go out on the porch, hey? Do your best old fogey impersonation with me, and I'll pretend to be impressed. Are you absolutely sure you're not senile?
Ryu asked jokingly as they both stepped outside, topping off their mugs on the way. Once they were seated in the chairs previously occupied by Bo and Karn, he glanced back towards the building.
Would it be out of line to ask just what the story is there? I know some of it, but I feel like I'm missing more than I'm not. They had a thing, back in the day, when we were young,
Martin explained.
I get the feeling that up until then, Dees had made a habit of finding a boyfriend every time, for something short-term, without commitments. It's the only kind of relationship she could have, when you get right down to it, and the idea of celibacy never was her style. No, I don't think so.
Ryu chuckled.
It always kind of puzzled me that she never hooked up with anybody long-term back when we were drinking buddies in Oria. Right.
Martin nodded.
Bo, though. He agreed to that at the time, but the thing about Bo is that he has a hard time opening up to people, and that just makes it all the more meaningful when he does. When the time came to let go, and let her go back to sleep. He tried, but he couldn't forget about her. The fool went and actually fell in love with her, no matter how stupid he knew it was. So when Karn and Gobi decided to stick around here instead of dying of old age, and Mogo and Ox decided not to. It took him a while to decide, but in the end, here he is. Also he could see her again, someday. Yeesh.
Ryu winced.
No wonder she took it so hard. Did she know he would? I think so,
Martin agreed.
How she feels about him, though. Well, that's none of my business or yours. That's between them, and I'm staying out of it.
He glanced at Ryu.
Alright, kid. Enough shooting the shit. Why'd you come here? Not that we mind, there's a reason we threw this party, after all, but you had more of a reason than wanting to see how some old fogies were doing, right?
Power. We need more of your power. God needs more of your power. Give your heart to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your heart and soul to God. You will become God's power.
Yeah,
Ryu admitted, looking back and trying to see some hint of himself in the old man's face, in his blazing eyes.
We're kind of at an impasse. Could use some advice. I figured it'd be something like that,
Martin replied, sighing.
You know, there's only so much we can do for you in that regard, right? That's what being neutral means. We can give advice, yeah, but that's all we can give you. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to stick a wrench in everybody's plans, Evans and Lawton, but...
He glanced up towards the roof.
But being neutral is actually working out for you, and for the first time in a long time, you've got too much at stake to risk ruining that,
Ryu guessed.
I can work with that. Nobody's asking you guys to stick your necks out for us. You already did your time, and now it's our turn. We're just here to draw on anything you learned from doing that might help. That much, I can do.
Martin smiled.
Why don't you start by telling me just what's happened recently that's got you so stymied, and then we'll go from there. All right,
Ryu agreed, and proceeded to explain the events of the past month and a half, starting from the ordeal in Windia and proceeding from there. He had a hunch that Martin already had a fair idea of what they had been up to prior to that. When he was done, he fell silent once more, and waited for a response from the old man.
Well,
Martin said eventually.
That explains a lot. I always wondered about Habaruko.
He shook his head.
You've lost a lot of friends thanks to him, haven't you? In a very short time. Yeah.
Ryu clenched his fists, thinking about all the losses they had taken in Evray.
Ray, Daisy, Tika, Claris. And the rest of the renegades, too.
He frowned as a thought struck him.
Something was weird about that. How come every one of them, except for Tika and Claris, succumbed to the soul storm? All of our guys were able to fend it off, but not a single one of the renegades could, except for those two. Was that just because of destiny? Somehow, I doubt it.
Martin shook his head.
Destiny might tell us what to do, but it doesn't give us any handouts to help us do it, kid. No, there's another reason for that.
He gave him another look.
Let me ask you something. What was the biggest difference between your dragonkin and those renegades? As a whole, a group, not as individuals. The biggest difference?
Ryu's frown deepened.
You're not talking about the fact that Claris was the only one of them who looked to be under 200 pounds. You mean something more important?
He thought about it, long and hard, before speaking again.
I guess. Maybe it was the way we did things. Tika and me. What kind of leaders we were, and how our teams responded to that. Elaborate,
Martin told him, eyes locked on his.
Tika.
Ryu searched for words.
They thought he was invincible. The renegades, I mean. Maybe Claris, too, but mainly it was him. And I can see why, after I fought him. Nothing natural in this world would have stood a chance against him, one-on-one. Even Habaruko had to lure him into a trap to kill him. Because of that. The rest of them.
He sighed.
I hate speaking ill of the dead, especially about friends. But they weren't as good as my guys are. Not in their skills, or in their will. They always counted on Tika handling the hard stuff for them, so that all they would have to do was back him up. And then when something came along that didn't work that way, that's what got them killed,
Martin said gravely.
That's the problem with that style of leadership. But that's not the way you do things, is it? Not usually,
Ryu agreed, drawing out his dragon's tear and staring at it, as it always did when he turned it upon himself. It turned a vibrant orange, the color of apathy and distrust, if not actual dislike.
I've still got no idea why, but they all seem to trust me to be their leader. Which I can try my hardest at, for their sake, but deep down. I know I'm not as great a guy as they all think I am. By myself, without them there with me. I'd be nothing. That's why they all work as hard as I do, to be the best they can be. They know I need them to. So how come you went up against him one-on-one, the way you did?
Martin pressed.
Tika. I was stupid.
Ryu shook his head.
Stupid, and blind, and forgetful. I had won every fight I had been in for so long, I started to forget what I had learned when I was younger. That there's no such thing as invincibility, and nobody who can't be killed. Especially with the breath of fire. I lost my head there. Started thinking of it as something that would win any fight, could take down anybody, as long as I got it off. And since Tika didn't know about it, he wouldn't have any countermeasures like the demon lords did. And it didn't,
Martin added.
You got your ass handed to you. That's the way it goes, sometimes. Happened to me often enough, back in the day. There's always a bigger fish. That, and you were only up to the second stage. Feel any different about it, now that you've got the third? Kind of.
Ryu stared out at the sky, as the sunset bled red across the clouds.
If I'd had the third stage, back then, and been able to handle it, I think I could have beaten Tika. But if I had, I'd have kept on acting that way. And maybe the rest of the team would have started believing it, too.
He shook his head.
Losing to Tika was a wake-up call. It helped me remember who I really am, and what my real power is. It's not the breath of fire. It's not this sword I pulled out of the sea. It's them. Bao, and Kat, and Nina, and Deez, and Jean, and Sten, and Rand, and Spar, and Nero. They're my true strength. Then I can tell you one thing.
Martin smiled grimly.
The reason they all see what you don't in yourself is because of that. Because you believe in them so strongly, more than anybody else ever has. That's why they follow you. Because you believe in them, they believe in you. Tika might have been stronger than you, but you're a better leader than he was. And better than I was, too. You.
Ryu smirked.
Come on, now I know you're winding me up. You were legendary. Yeah, but that wasn't why.
Martin shook his head.
I cared about them, sure. Still do. And it goes the other way. But we aren't as close as you guys are, and never were. It took time to develop. What came first, what bound us together, was our common cause. We wanted to stop the Dark Dragon Empire, and everybody had their own reasons for that. I remember, from the book I've read,
Ryu said, raising an eyebrow.
You ever seen it? Nero showed it to me. Crawfield's Fall of the House of Zog. Crawfield.
Martin chuckled.
That old codger. I remember him. He got everything he knew right, but there were a few things he didn't, 'cause he didn't know. Not that that was his fault, it's probably the most accurate account out there. Anyways, like I was saying, I led like Tika did. Did my best to be invincible, so all the others would have to do was clean up after me. It was a different time, and the world was a different place. Less civilized. When you get right down to it, I was pretty savage, myself. I probably cared more about my revenge than I did about them, even if they were my friends. I couldn't do that,
Ryu said after a long moment.
If it came down to that. To getting out of this destiny bullshit, or saving one of the team. I'd take the latter, any day. And that, right there, is what I'm talking about.
Martin clapped him on the shoulder.
Like you said, your true strength isn't the breath of fire. It's them. Them, and everybody else you care about. You might not be able to save Ray, or Daisy, or Tika or Claris or the other renegades, but you can make sure that their deaths at least had a meaning. Make sure they're remembered. And save this world. Not for its own sake, or for yours. For theirs. Yeah.
Ryu finished his mug and set it down, then stood up.
In that case, thanks for the party, but we should really head back home and get some sleep. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. That we do,
Deez said from behind him, and they both turned to see her emerge from the door, calm and composed.
It was good seeing you all again, don't get me wrong, but you handed in your resignation 1,000 years ago,
Martin said quietly, smiling still.
And you've got another job now. Always were a sharp one.
She smiled as well then, and gave him a quick hug.
Take care of yourself, and Nina too. Shouldn't that be what you're saying to me?
The elder Nina said lightly as she and her descendant both flew down from the roof. A moment later, Kat landed nimbly next to them, and Spar descended as well, hanging onto its whip like a lifeline until its feet touched grass and it pulled the length of thorned green leather in.
I was about to say.
Karn added as everybody else came around the side of the cabin.
You're right,
Deez admitted wryly, hugging all three of her other old friends in turn as well.
What was I thinking? Don't suppose we'd be able to talk you guys into coming by sometime so we can return the favor?
Bao asked with a cheerful grin.
I think you would like the place. Tell you what.
Gobi gave him a grin right back, along with a thumbs up.
Win this, come back home, and we'll drop by for the after party. And here I thought I had seen the last of those,
Martin muttered, though there was no bite in it.
Silly of me, really. It was,
his wife agreed, draping an arm around his shoulders.
Good luck. We'll be cheering you on. And we'll be holding you to that promise,
Ryu replied, as they all waved and smiled, and Dees took them home. It was near midnight in that part of the world by then, and even Nero was asleep, so they all turned in as well without another word. Everybody already knew what tomorrow would bring. Power. We still need more of your power. God still needs more of your power. Give your soul to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Give your heart and mind to God. You are becoming God's power. The next day, they took the Great Bird to the peninsula south of Windia, where the town of Gate was located. Gate was almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. To the north of the peninsula, a massive mountain range separated it from the lands of the Wing clan. Caverns leading beneath said mountains were the only easy means of traveling to the town for most people. Aside from a single small harbor, though not many seemed to mind, there was little of interest there to anybody. That being said, its geographical location gave it a perfect climate. Neither too hot nor too cold, far enough from the coast to avoid the worst of the storms yet close enough to enjoy the benefits, and shielded from north winds by the mountains. It was pleasant all year round, or should have been. Thus, when they touched down in a meadow full of dead brown grass, east of a small wood full of equally stricken trees, Ryu had no need to tell the others just how much it had changed.
It's horrible,
Nina murmured, looking around.
I'm surprised it's not snowing here, as well, but... Oh, Spar, I'm so sorry. Fascinating, in an unspeakable way,
Spar said, looking sickly as it glanced around.
I believe I now know what it feels like to be physically ill. If you'll excuse me. I ain't exactly a green freak, sorry, Spar, but this is just wrong,
Sten growled as the grassman vomited in a nearby bush.
This Baruberry asshole's got a lot to answer for. Not as much as Habaruko, of course, but still. They've both got accounts way past due,
Ryu said grimly. He had rarely gone beyond the town itself, so painful familiarity was at a minimum so far.
And we're here to call them in. Let's go see if there's anybody who can tell us if anything's come up since the Rangers Guild pulled out of here a few months ago.
Though he said nothing as they wandered into town, from his first glance he could tell that the rest of their time there would be painful. Everything he saw brought memories rushing back, from the abandoned statue of Loden covered in moss and surrounded by weeds near the south gate, to the home where he had been born and raised, a cathedral of St. Eva with living quarters on the second floor. As they walked down the dirt roads, however, something else began to bother him. The familiar faces he had been dreading were nowhere to be found. Gate was abandoned and empty.
Does anybody else have a real bad feeling about this?
Kat asked quietly as they continued from house to house, road to road, without any signs of a living creature, human or otherwise.
Where'd everybody go? The Rangers Guild said the town called them in,
Sten recalled.
So they were still here a few months back. Did Baruberry kill everybody or something? Payback for sicking the Rangers on him? I doubt it,
Ryu said, shaking his head. Despite never actually encountering him in more than 10 years, for some reason he felt like he knew a few things about the demon who had haunted his nightmares ever since.
Don't think it'd be his style. Then they're probably all doing something,
Bao said, frowning.
And this ain't the time for a party, or anything like that. So what is it? Knowing our luck.
Dee's eyes narrowed.
We had better get out into that canyon to the dragon, and quick. Ah, shit,
Rand muttered, as they all broke into a run.
This way.
Ryu yelled, leading them past the mayor's manor and into the canyon behind the town, where he and his sister had spent many early days playing, under the gaze of the town's guardian. The undergrowth, thick and wild, was as dry and dead as the rest of the vegetation, but he still remembered the hidden paths through it.
Who's there?
A stout old man in a doublet and hose cried as they burst out of the shrubbery into the clearing before the town's namesake. The southern mist of the mountains ended there, in a cliff that stretched flat and wide for miles in either direction. A pair of massive stone doors with no means of opening filled the cliff's face ahead of them, and all the townspeople were gathered around it in a half-circle, keeping at least 10 feet away. Only the local priest of St. Eva, a man who was massive in height and breadth despite his old age, was actually approaching the doors, and the one who slept over them. The Dragon of Gate was huge, larger than even a house. Her 4 claws held 2 smaller gates closed, off to the sides, and her head dangled over the main portal, a barricade greater than any lock. Though her silver-white scales were harder than steel, and her claws and fangs fearsomely long and sharp, Her closed eyes gave her face an oddly kind, gentle expression as she slept.
We're here representing the Rangers Guild, and what are you doing?
Ryu yelled, watching the priest step back, away from the gate. Something had been attached to the doors. Something that was ticking.
Everybody, get down!
The priest shouted. Ryu remembered him, vaguely, from the brief time he had spent in the brainwashed town before fleeing with Bao. His name had been Father Hulk, an appropriate one considering his size, lantern-jawed and heavy-browed, with a bald head and an impressive white mustache. He looked like a retired bouncer or bruiser despite his brown robes, a walking cane in one hand his only sign of weakness.
It's about to go off. Are you freaking kidding me?
Deez and Kat both screamed in unison as they, and the townspeople, all dove for the dirt. Before they hit it, white light blinded Ryu as a deafening explosion filled his ears, and when he did feel earth beneath him, it was shaking violently. When he managed to pry his eyes open again, he confirmed his worst fears with a single glance. The ground below the gate and the cliff around it were all charred and blasted, though the doors themselves were unmarked. The dragon had pulled her head back, the underside of her jaw black and burned, and when he looked west and east, he could see that her claws had been retracted even further.
Rangers!
The fat man was saying as he stood back up, brushing himself off.
Well, it's about time. I'm Ross, the mayor, and hey.
Ryu ignored him, charging the priest instead. Seizing the old man's collar in his hands, he slammed him against the cliff.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
He yelled, not particularly caring that the priest had at least a foot and 100 pounds on him. He was furious in a way he had worked his entire life to control and restrain, drowning out all reason and logic.
Leave Father Hulk alone.
One townsman said, and the people started to press in, only to pause as the rest of the dragon kin drew their weapons.
Ah!
Bao shook his head.
The
priest sputtered.
The rangers who were here last said a giant monster was the cause of the plague. We searched, but we found no trace of any such beast, until we realized our own traditions were blinding us to the truth. The dragon was the fiend who had cursed us so, and so when no more rangers came, we had no choice but to take matters into our own hands.
And then the sounds of screaming came from both east and west, as hideous yellow humanoids flew away into the sky on dragonfly wings, from the directions of the two side doors, their claws and teeth dripping fresh blood.
The dragon was protecting you, you imbeciles.
Ryu turned his head to scream at the townsfolk as they stared, white and shaking.
It's the only thing keeping those doors closed, and the demons inside there. That freak who's causing the plague wants them open. She's the only one who ever managed to beat him, 13 years ago, and you try to bomb her. You know about that night?
Ross stammered.
Who are you people? You could say we're specialists,
Sten drawled.
Demon slayers, to be specific. The Rangers Guild figured this was out of their league, so they called us in to handle the matter. Of course, we didn't figure we'd have amateur hour making things even worse. If you had people stationed by those other two doors, I'm guessing those demons who just came out made short work of them. Good job. No, seriously, way to go. No.
Father Hulk whimpered, as several townspeople began to cry.
What have we done? It's not too late.
Ryu set him down, feeling slightly ashamed of himself as his rage cooled. The people of Gate had just lost several loved ones, and the fact that it was their own fault was no excuse for making things worse.
It looks like the main gate isn't open yet. She's still doing her job, despite what you tried to pull.
He glanced at Deez.
I'm guessing that's significant. The other two will close again, soon, as long as the main seal isn't breached, she said, nodding. Those assholes were just the advanced scouts. They won't have enough time to bring a significant force through. All right.
Ryu nodded slowly.
Then we still have time to figure out what we're going to do about this.
Staring at the dragon again, he fought the urge to climb up to it. She wouldn't even know he was there, and they had more important things to do than engage in pointless sentimentality. Sighing, he glanced at Ross.
This isn't quite how we planned on asking this, but is there anything else you know about the gate, or the dragon, or demons, or anything else? Anything at all that might help us? No,
Ross said quietly, head in his hands.
We only did this because Father Hulk told us. We never meant to. There is one thing,
Father Hulk interjected, and they all turned to him. He seemed mostly recovered, though his hands still shook slightly as he clutched his cane.
A strange woman, who several of us have seen visiting the dragon at night over the years, though she never came into town or spoke to anybody. A young woman, with hair like yours, young man, along with wings like a black bat. Smith.
Cat blurted out.
What's she got to do with this? A lot more than we thought, apparently,
Ryu growled, mind racing.
We never did find out what her stake in all this was. Seems like we should have. Alright, old-timer, it's your lucky day. We know exactly who you're talking about. We'll run her down and see what she knows before we come back and take care of this. Just keep an eye on those doors, from a safe distance, we don't want anybody else getting hurt. And for law. God's sake, don't do anything more to that dragon. You have my word, as a loyal servant of Saint Eva,
Father Hulk promised.
We have made a terrible mistake. I only hope that we can atone for it. We'll see.
Ryu turned away.
Alright, let's head over to...
He blinked as, in a bubble of golden light, a piece of paper appeared in the air before him.
Now what?
Catching it, he opened it as the magic vanished, and his blood ran cold. Hurry back. It's your father. Nero.
Scratch that.
He yelled.
Back to the base. Now. What?
Jean started to ask, then shook his head.
Of course, Mon Ami.
He cast the spell, and the startled townsfolk disappeared along with the canyon, his old home melting away to be replaced by the new. Nero was already outside, hobbling down from the front door on his cane, eyes wide.
He's gone.
The old man shouted as explanation.
I took my eyes off of him for 5 minutes, and he vanished. No signs of a struggle, no magic I could detect, just poof. Gainer.
Cat swore.
Shit and double shit, it's just one thing after another. That means it probably wasn't abduction,
Sten said, eyes narrowed.
But why would he wander off by himself, and where would he go?
And then the earth began to shake again, beneath their feet, and Ryu's eyes widened in horror as he realized what it meant.
No.
He screamed, running for the well, only for Cat to catch him and hold him back.
Don't.
She yelled.
You'll break your neck if you try going down there like this. But my father.
Ryu yelled, struggling against her strength despite how futile he knew it to be.
He's down there. He's climbed into the machine. What?
She said, sounding stunned, and for a moment he was almost able to get free, before she tightened her grip on his arms again.
Why would he do that? The magical drain,
Nina murmured.
It'll never stop. He's too old for his body to ever truly recover. The only way to keep himself alive without constantly needing to be drained by others. What's going on?
Granny yelled, coming out of her house. Other townsfolk were doing the same, all yelling panicked questions.
Let me put it this way.
Dees shouted back.
If anybody here's afraid of heights, now would be a really good time to confess. A question comes to mind,
Spar said politely.
If Gainer is inside the machine, then who is directing the controls?
They all considered that for a moment.
If I let you go, will you let Dees cast that spell on you?
Cat asked Ryu.
The one that'll let you just drop to the bottom and live. I told you, that one only works as long as you're already falling.
Dees said crossly, slithering over to the well.
Alright, do it.
Ryu didn't bother saying anything else as Cat released him. He simply ran for the well as soon as he could and leaped in, trusting Dees. As he had expected, his fall slowed to the point where he was able to land safely and run forward, to where Gainer was sitting in the device.
Ryu?
His father asked, blind eyes searching for him.
Ha. I suppose I should have known you would realize what I was doing immediately. Dad.
Ryu whispered, as the others began to join him, one by one. He groped for questions, for any words at all, but in the end could only ask one.
Why? For all those years, beneath Evray, my life was torment,
Gainer told him, as the room continued to shake.
Not because I was trapped. Not because of my tormentors. Not even because of the device itself, painful as it was. No, the worst part of it was that I was helpless, unable to do anything for my son and daughter. You freed me from that place, and I will never be able to thank you enough for that. But I will not live out the rest of my life as a burden on you, unable to do anything more for my son, requiring constant supervision just to stay alive. Never. Dad.
Ryu whispered, the others standing beside him.
We never thought that. Any of us. But I did,
Gainer said sternly, and now there was something of the father Ryu remembered in his voice again, the iron-hard resolve with which he had raised him.
I will not be a burden upon you, son. I will not be useless again. This machine is unpleasant, but it will keep me alive, until my age finally carries me off. And by doing so, it will allow me to help you, to help all of you. I do not know why this machine is here, but despite my knowledge of what Saint Eva truly is, I cannot help but have faith that some power made this happen, for a reason. That you will need this, someday. Please, my son. Allow me to do my part. For you, and for this world. Dad.
Ryu repeated, closing his eyes and bowing his head. Emotions and logic all fought within him, as he struggled to make sense of it all, to find some answer he could accept. After moments that seemed like an eternity, he raised his head again and smiled sadly.
Even if I tell you no, you'll just clobber me, and tell me not to be so stubborn, won't you? That's right.
Gainer smiled as well, just as sadly.
You're too young to be as bull-headed as I am.
He sighed, then, somehow seeming to relax despite the obvious strain on his face.
Besides, this machine, it's not as bad as the one beneath Evray. It's exhausting, but it doesn't actually hurt. Maybe it's just because my body is so used to these devices, but I can bear it, I promise. I'll come visit you,
Ryu promised, walking forward to place a hand on the machine.
Every day. We can play chess, or I'll bring you books, or something. We all will,
Bao said, and the others nodded.
And the townsfolk, too. Thank you, all of you.
Gainer's smile deepened.
I know I can trust you, to take care of my son.
He hesitated for a moment before continuing.
There is one more thing. Name it,
Ryu said, quietly, solemnly.
Anything. Nero tells me that this town of yours has no name, as of yet,
Gainer explained.
If you don't mind indulging an old man's sense of humor, I believe that township would be appropriate.
Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed, for a long moment. Then Ryu snorted, Kat giggled, Jean chuckled, and before long everybody was laughing. It was the wild, desperate laugh of those who were only doing so because humor was preferable to sorrow, and they all knew it, but they kept laughing anyways.
Your sense of humor always was like that,
Ryu said finally, wiping a tear from his eye.
I like it. Our town has a name. Township. It's perfect, Dad.
Despite everything, he smiled like he meant it. He had had a lot of practice, after all.
Another round, miss?
The bartender asked.
Yeah.
Patty set a few coins on the countertop, enough for at least 3 more.
Keep them coming.
Nodding, he refilled her mug and left it there without another word, which she appreciated. She wasn't in any mood for talk. She didn't immediately start drinking again either, though, instead, she simply stared into the ale as it sloshed lightly, thinking about all the others she had shared with Tika, Clarice, and the other renegades during the brief time she had known them. She had heard the news about Evray, of course. Everybody had heard the news about Evray. It was the talk of the world, and would be for years to come. The field of religion aside, the geopolitical board alone had just been smashed, and nobody knew what shape the next game would take when it finally came. Rumors said that the World Council and Prima had called an emergency meeting, not just of members but of the leaders of other nations around the world. The one thing nobody seemed too sure about was who had done it. Nobody but Patty.
Maybe they're alive,
she muttered to herself, still staring at her ale.
It's not impossible. They could have made it out. Them, and those other idiots, too.
She wasn't as well acquainted with the Dragon Kin as she had been with the Renegades, despite the annoying number of times she had run into them over the past year, but despite how much they irritated her, she knew they were good people. Better than most, anyways. She might even have considered going so far as to call them friends, if she had any friends, which she didn't. Only business associates, like the Renegades.
Oh, who are you kidding, girl?
She growled finally, grabbing the mug and downing the entire contents in one go. Only when it was empty did she lower it, shaking her head.
They're dead. They're all dead, just like everybody else you've ever been able to tolerate. Look on the bright side. At least you're used to it by now.
Slamming the mug down on the counter, she glanced at the bartender again.
Another. A healthy drinker, hey?
A crude voice said from behind her, chuckling.
I like that in a girl.
Glancing over her shoulder, she saw an overweight, unshaven human leering at her, clad in green silk with a pink scarf tied around his head.
Why don't you let me buy you a few rounds after you've paid off your tab? I'll even.
Whatever he had been about to say next was cut off as Patty's whip snapped out and coiled around his neck.
I could pop your head off like a grape, right here, right now, if I really wanted to,
she said quietly and calmly, her voice clearly audible in the suddenly silent bar.
The only reason I'm not, in fact, is because it would make a mess, and I kind of like this place. Appreciated,
the bartender grunted, setting her refilled mug back down and completely ignoring the man, whose eyes were bulging now as his face began to change colors.
That being said, if you want to get pissed off and wait for me outside with a couple friends, by all means, go right ahead,
Patty continued, smiling sweetly.
I'd love the chance to let off a little stress where there wouldn't be any reason not to. If I were you, though, I'd take my advice.
She dropped the smile.
Get lost. Now. I'm not in the mood.
She pulled her whip back and turned away, as if daring him to try and do something while her back was turned, but he didn't, and she went back to staring into her mug as if nothing had happened.
Screw 'em all, anyways,
she muttered.
They were morons, all of them. Too sentimental. Too optimistic. They had plenty of chances to learn what the world's really like, and they still kept believing in all that bullshit.
She snorted.
Only a matter of time before something killed them, really. Not a surprise.
She paused, then laughed, disgusted.
And now I'm talking to myself. Get a hold of yourself, girl, or else you really will start to lose it.
To say she had had a hard life would be an understatement. After she had lost her family and she wasn't going to think about that, not again, never again. She had learned where that would lead her. She had been on her own in a wild world, one where civilization and the open road both had their own sets of dangers for a little lost girl, and it was hard to decide which was worst. She had grown up hard, and mean, and cynical, because she had had to. Because doing otherwise meant dying, or worse. And yet, all the same, she had never quite been able to completely smother that tiny spark left deep inside her that liked people like Lee, and Parsha, and Battison, and Sean. People who had been through almost as much shit as she had, but had managed to take it better than her. Who had weathered the worst the world could throw at them, and somehow, keep their ability to trust others, though obviously they didn't do so easily. That, more than anything else, was what Patty envied. What they had found in each other, that she could watch from close by, but never have for herself.
Shit,
she muttered, thinking about the time Dogie had come to save her from the demonic Count Trout who had hung her up in his torture cellar, despite the fact that he didn't even like her. The time she and Clarice had shared drinks and watched Tika beat the shit out of an angry mob, single-handedly. The time she had helped the Dragon Kin perform a hit on the demon lord Shapukai, who had infiltrated High Fort as a general. The time she, Tika and Clarice had burglarized Sky Tower, in the middle of the ocean. The time she had sworn to Chon to help her out of her situation with Tika. The first time she had met Battison, bumping into him as she fled the botched robbery in the very town she was currently drinking in, and how one glance at him had stunned her. How she had almost gotten up the nerve to ask him about his childhood, almost managed to convince herself to believe in miracles one last time. And then she had remembered that miracles weren't real, and that God was a sick joke, and that luck and fate and chance were not only against you no matter who you were but actively trying to screw you over at every opportunity.
Double shit,
she said quietly, before draining her mug once more. She normally didn't drink quite so much, more out of her preference to remain in full control of her own actions at all times than lack of tolerance, but recent events were getting to her, badly. Not only was she cracking up, she was going soft, too. Either one was liable to be fatal in her line of work, but both at once was about as bad as it came. For a moment, as she slammed the mug back down, she considered holing up for a while, finding some place to take some time and get her head back together. And then she heard the rumbling, and the noise from outside, and sighed before walking out to see what was going on. And despite herself, despite everything she had seen and done before she had even hit the double digits, she found herself staring up at the sky, eyes bulging and jaw slack just like everybody else. At the sky, and at what was currently flying through it over their heads. A massive chunk of land, about half the size of the capital itself, floating as serenely as if it were bobbing on water rather than gliding placidly along about a mile up in the air. Dimly, as if she were underwater, she heard other people shouting about what it was. Some of them had seen it coming before it had neared the city, and claimed that there were buildings on top of it, enough for an entire town. As soon as her ears picked that up, she realized what direction it had come from, and she knew what town it was, and who it was that were up there, in complete defiance of all natural laws.
I'll be damned,
she whispered, so quietly that nobody else could hear her, no longer caring that she was talking to herself, as she slowly grinned.
They are alive. And here I thought they couldn't pull anything crazier than they'd already done. I really have to stop underestimating those idiots.
She stayed there, quietly watching the floating chunk of land pass by over hometown as it continued on its way north. Soon, it was far enough away that she could see the buildings atop it herself, and confirm their familiarity. Only once it was completely out of sight, vanished over the horizon, did she turn and head back inside, mentally revising her plans for the day as she did. One more drink would have to be enough. Once she was finished with that, it was time to be on the road again, which was probably smart anyway, considering her history with hometown. She was a busy girl, and she had places to be, and people to rob. And if the renegades weren't going to be able to help her finish settling her score with the agents of Infinity, well, that was what backup plans were for. All the lies I've lied and why I'm justified.